Cato the Younger was a Roman senator. He was the Stoic ideal, the Iron Man of philosophy. His whole life was a lesson in self-mastery. 2,000 years ago, he lived that ideal. He became a legend in his own time. We admire resilience, but we rarely see it pushed to the absolute limit. Cato was that limit. His will was unbreakable. It seems almost mythical now. Seneca noted that a wise person stays the same under all circumstances. Cato was that person. His presence was a moral weapon. He was consistent. So how did a man become that consistent? What does it mean to live by unbreakable principles? And what's the foundation of an unshakable character? By the end, you'll have a blueprint, the core Stoic disciplines that built his iron character. To strengthen your own resolve. Cato filtered everything through one question. Was this the virtuous choice? It wasn't a preference. It was the bedrock. The Stoics had a central doctrine. Virtue, arete, excellence of character. That's the only true good, and vice is the only true evil. Everything else, all the things we chase, wealth, reputation, health, even life, they called those indifferent. Preferred or dispreferred, but not good or bad, not in the moral sense. That distinction only exists in our own choices. It's the dichotomy of control. Epictetus said it, some things are up to us, some things are not. Our opinions, our impulses, our desires, what's our own doing, that's up to us. Our body, property, reputation, public office, what's not our own doing, that's not up to us. Cato took that to an extreme. His political stands, the ones that looked stubborn or self-destructive, they weren't about winning. They were about acting with integrity. Regardless of the outcome, the Senate's approval, the people's cheers, the safety of the Republic itself, those were preferred indifference, but compromising his principles for them. That was a true evil, a corruption of the soul. So when they offered him huge bribes to sway his vote, he didn't just refuse, he made a public spectacle of it. He exposed the corruption. When political compromise would have saved him trouble or gained him power, he stood firm, even alone. The external reward meant nothing. The internal alignment meant everything. That's the forge. That's how an iron character is made. It's the practice of asking, is my choice coming from integrity or from seeking something outside myself? You can think about your own life. Where might you be trading a little internal integrity for some external approval or comfort or reward? It's a subtle shift. But recognizing it, that's the first step toward building a character that can't be bent. When someone insults you or a plan falls apart, there's that first flash. Anger, maybe, frustration, a defensive feeling, that initial impression, you can't control that. It just happens. What you do next, though, that's where the power is. The Stoics had a name for that next step, the Discipline of Assent. It's about guarding the inner citadel of your mind. You pause before you accept that first impression as truth. For Cato, this was his armor. It let him face political riots, crushing losses, public scorn, without losing his composure. It wasn't that he didn't feel the sting. He just refused to let it dictate his actions. This hinges on an idea. Proherses, your faculty of choice. It's not your emotions. It's not your circumstances. It's your capacity to judge, to decide, to give or withhold your assent to the thoughts that enter your mind. Think of your mind as a fortress gate. An impression knocks. It shouts a message. This person insulted you. You must be furious. The discipline of assent is the guard at that gate who pauses, examines the message. Asks, is this actually true? Is this a fact, or is it my interpretation layered on top of the fact? Cato mastered that guard duty. A political mob threatens him. The impression is danger, chaos. His assent, his judgment was this. His duty required him to stand firm. Fear was not a valid reason to abandon his post. The external event was loud, frightening. His inner citadel stayed silent, secure. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this centuries later in his Meditations. He reminded himself to receive impressions without immediate judgment, to strip away the story we tell ourselves about an event. He said, "Do not be disturbed. Things themselves have no power to form our judgments. That's the core of mental freedom. In our world, this discipline is more crucial than ever. We live in constant information overload. A reactive social media culture. Impressions are fired at us like arrows, each one designed to trigger an immediate emotional assent: outrage, fear, envy. We're trained to react first and think never. Cato's world had its own chaos, political riots, the streets of Rome erupting in violence. His colleagues would panic, their judgments hijacked by the impression of imminent doom. Cato remained calm, not because he was unaware of the danger, but because he withheld his assent from the narrative of panic. He saw the event for what it was: a disorderly crowd, and chose his response based on principle, not primal fear. Think of his reaction to losing elections. It happened more than once. The impression offered to him was public rejection, personal failure, humiliation. A lesser man would have assented to that. Become bitter, changed his tactics to become a crowd pleaser. Cato withheld his assent. He judged the event differently. The people had made a choice. That was their right. His worth was not determined by their vote. His character remained intact regardless of the office he held. He accepted the loss with the same steady demeanor he used for a victory. That's the superpower of withheld assent. It breaks the chain between what happens to you and how you ultimately respond. So consider a recent moment from your own life. A knee-jerk reaction to a critical comment, a traffic jam, a sudden change in plans. Replay that moment. The first impression arrived, loud and convincing. Now imagine the guard at the gate. What if you had paused just for a breath and questioned that impression? What if you had withheld your immediate assent? The event itself wouldn't have changed, but your entire inner experience of it could have. Your subsequent action could have been transformed. This is the quiet, daily forge, where an iron character is tempered, not in the grand battles, but in the momentary choice to be the guardian of your own mind. Some philosophers stayed in their studies. Cato went into Roman politics. That wasn't a break from Stoicism. It was the point of it. The philosophy he followed required action, action guided by duty. The Stoics had a word for this: oikaiosis, belonging, the idea that we aren't isolated. We're made for fellowship, connected in a web. It starts with family, then community, then country, then all of humanity. To live according to nature meant living in harmony with that. So justice wasn't an abstract idea. It was the daily work of fulfilling your role in that web. For Cato, his role was clear. He was a Roman senator. That seat wasn't a trophy. It wasn't for personal glory. It was a sacred trust, a duty station. His obligation was to the Republic, to its laws, to its people, especially those without a voice. That's why his political battles looked hopeless to others. To him, they were the only logical path. He was practicing the discipline of action. Every speech, every vote, every prosecution was an act of justice, done because it was right, not because it would succeed. Seneca wrote about this later. He said, "You can't live happily if you only look out for yourself. You have to live for your neighbor, to live for yourself." Cato lived that. His famous prosecutions weren't personal vendettas. They were his duty. He saw corruption as theft from the Roman people, a violation of the social contract he was sworn to uphold. When he opposed Caesar's land reforms, he wasn't just being obstructionist. He saw a gifted individual using public goodwill to concentrate power. Eroding the institutions meant to protect the common good. Cato fought not against Caesar the man, but against the principle, one man's will overriding the law. He was willing to be unpopular, to be ridiculed, to lose, if it meant standing for the principle. That's the harder path. the discipline of thought guards your inner citadel. The discipline of action requires you to march out of the gates into the fray. It asks you to translate private integrity into public service. For us, that might not mean the Roman Senate. It means our families, our workplaces, our local communities. It's the social duty you sense but might avoid, out of convenience or a fear of conflict. Maybe it's speaking up in a meeting when you see an unfair decision. Maybe it's volunteering for a difficult role everyone sidesteps. It could be as simple as keeping a promise to a neighbor when it becomes inconvenient. Cato's example pushes a difficult question. Where in your own circle are you staying quiet, staying comfortable, when a sense of duty is quietly calling you to act? The action doesn't need to be grand, but it must align with that deeper sense of what is just, what is right for your shared community. That's how philosophy leaves the page. Changes the world not through contemplation alone, but through the courageous, often thankless work of doing what you ought to do. He saw wealth and power all around him. It didn't move him. Other senators wore silk, held feasts. Cato wore the same dark toga. He walked barefoot in the cold rain, not for show. It was a private exercise. Training himself, that's the final discipline, the discipline of desire. It means rewiring what you want, becoming indifferent in the Stoic sense to what fortune gives or takes. The Stoics called these things adiaphora, indifference. They aren't good or evil by themselves. Their value is only in how we use them, but they did sort them. Preferred indifference, health, a good reputation, enough wealth, friendship. These are naturally agreeable. We can prefer them, we should, and dispreferred indifference. Sickness, poverty, obscurity, losing someone. These are naturally difficult. We'd avoid them, but here's the radical turn. Neither category decides your happiness or your virtue. Your character isn't what you have, it's how you relate to what you have. Cato mastered that. He enjoyed modest comfort, but he practiced going without. Ate simple food, drank the same cheap wine as his servants. When they offered him a luxurious bribe, he didn't just refuse it, he treated it with contempt. As something that could corrupt his judgment, it had no power over his desire. Epictetus said it, he was a slave who became a teacher. Suffering comes not from events, but from our judgments about them. And our judgments come from our desires. If you desire only what's in your control, your own choices, your virtue, you'll never be disappointed. If you desire things outside your control, wealth, fame, other people's actions, you set yourself up for frustration. Cato's life was a lesson. Take the great military command. During a crisis, the Senate needed to give supreme authority to one general. The obvious choice was Pompey. A war hero, Cato was also a candidate, but he supported Pompey not from weakness, from a clear judgment of what the Republic needed. He desired the safety of Rome. He did not desire the glory for himself. When Pompey got the honor, Cato was composed. No envy, no bitterness. His desire was aligned with the outcome. Because his desire was for the right action, not the reward. That's the secret. To wish for events to happen as they do happen. That's Amor Fati, the love of fate. It's not passive resignation. It's an active, joyful alignment. You look at whatever life brings, a promotion or a layoff, praise or criticism, an easy day or a hard one, and you say, this is the material I've been given to practice virtue with. So here's a challenge. Pause if you want. List 3 preferred indifference in your life. Maybe your career title, your financial security, a relationship, your health. Now consider your attachment to them. How much of your peace is tied to their presence, their stability? The goal isn't to become a robot without preference. It's to hold these things lightly, to appreciate them while they're here, but to know deep down you'd be okay without them, that your worth, your character, your core self isn't in them. That's how Cato could face the collapse of his world, the end of the Republic, with the same steady gaze he used to look at a chest of gold. Both were just events. His task stayed the same, to choose virtuously in response. Cato's greatest fear had lost its power to scare him. That wasn't a theory, it was his daily training. The Stoics had a name for it, Premeditatio Malorum, the premeditation of evils. It sounds dark, like pessimistic worrying, but it's the opposite. It's a deliberate rehearsal. A strategic walk-through of life's potential hardships, to drain them of their surprise, to drain them of their terror. Think of it as a mental inoculation against future shock. By voluntarily contemplating loss or difficulty, or even the end, you strengthen your resolve. You discover ahead of time that you can endure it. This practice forged the steel in Cato's courage. He would mentally walk through the scenarios his enemies hoped would break him: exile, poverty, public disgrace, death. He didn't just think about them in the abstract. He felt them: the cold of a foreign shore, the silence of obscurity, the finality of a state-ordered execution. And then he asked himself a simple question, a devastating one: and then what? After that worst thing happens, what remains? His answer was always the same. My character, my ability to choose with virtue, those cannot be taken by any external force. Seneca advised this same practice, writing to his friend Lucilius. He said, set aside a certain number of days, be content with the scantiest fare, the coarsest dress, and say to yourself, is this the condition that I feared? It's a form of mental vaccination. By exposing yourself to the idea of difficulty in a controlled way, you build the antibodies of resilience, so when the real challenge comes, your mind doesn't panic. It recognizes the terrain. It says, I have walked this path in my thoughts. I am prepared. Cato's entire political stand was a lived premeditatio. He knew with absolute clarity that opposing Julius Caesar could lead to his own demise. He said it out loud. He told his colleagues that Caesar's rise meant the death of the Republic's laws, and that he, Cato, would rather die in its defense than live under a dictator's shadow. This wasn't drama. It was the conclusion of his mental rehearsal. He had already faced that outcome in his mind and found his peace with it. So when the threat materialized, he wasn't paralyzed by fear. His course was already set. His courage was already banked. This exercise flips our natural instinct. We spend so much energy avoiding thoughts of bad things, hoping that by ignoring them we can keep them away. The Stoic argues that by facing them voluntarily, you disarm them. You realize the anticipation is almost always worse than the reality, and you develop a profound gratitude for the present moment. The food you have today, the safety you enjoy, the people around you, they are not guaranteed. Premeditatio makes you see them as the gifts they are, without needing to lose them first to appreciate their worth. So how do you practice this without spiraling into anxiety? You start small, not with life-altering catastrophes. With daily, manageable inconveniences. Here's a simple prompt. Tonight, before you sleep, spend 1 single minute. Mentally rehearse a minor frustration tomorrow might bring. Your bus running late, a critical email from your boss, a planned meeting being cancelled. Walk through it. See the bus pulling away. Feel that initial jolt of annoyance. Then pause, ask Cato's question, and then what? You will be late. You might have to send an apology. You will adapt. The world will not end. Your character remains intact. You might even find a better use for the unexpected time. By doing this, you are not inviting the event. You are building a mental reflex, a calm, practiced response that says, I have considered this. I can handle it. This is how you forge the steel of an unshakable mind. Not by avoiding the dark, but by familiarizing yourself with it, so that when you must walk through it, you are not a stranger in that land. Cato didn't simply accept his defeat. He willed it. That's Amor Fati, loving your fate. It's not passive. It's an active embrace, seeing every event as necessary, especially hardship, seeing it as the exact material your soul needs for its training. For Cato, the collapse of the Republic wasn't a tragedy. It was the final examination, and he intended to pass it. The Stoics saw the universe as a rational whole. The Logos, Marcus Aurelius wrote about accepting his place in that design. To welcome every event because it was woven into your destiny. To wish otherwise is to wish against nature itself. Amor Fati is the emotional form of that. Saying yes to your entire life script, the easy chapters and the brutally difficult ones, because they all make you who you are. Cato's final act was his lesson in this love. When his cause was lost and Caesar's victory was absolute, Cato chose his place. He spent his last night in philosophical conversation. Then he retired to his room to read. He read Plato's Phaedo, a dialogue about the immortality of the soul. Here he was, facing the end of his world, the end of his life, and he sought wisdom about eternity. Aligning his mind with a perspective larger than the moment, practicing the ultimate premeditation. Then he took his own life. This wasn't despair. It was the final, free choice of a Roman citizen. A man who would not live under a dictator. It was philosophical consistency. He loved the fate that let him die free more than a life of compromised principle. His fate was harsh, but he loved it for the opportunity, the chance to show unbroken integrity. Centuries later, Nietzsche adopted this idea. He wrote that his formula for greatness was Amor Fati. To not just bear what's necessary, but to love it. Cato lived that to its conclusion. He looked at the ruin of everything he fought for and saw the perfect stage for his final act. This concept asks a radical question. Can you look back on your own difficulties not as mistakes or bad luck, but as essential ingredients, the painful breakup that taught resilience, the career setback that forced a new direction, the loneliness that fostered self-reliance? Amor Fati invites you to reframe that past event, to see it not as something that happened to you, but for you. For your strength, your empathy, your depth. So consider one past hardship you carry, something that still feels like a scar. Try on Cato's lens. Ask what that difficulty made possible in you that comfort never could. What strength was forged there? What clarity? What compassion? This isn't about denying the pain. It's about finding the meaning within it. To love your fate is to reclaim authorship of your story. To see every event, especially the harsh ones, as necessary threads. Threads in the tapestry of a character you're still weaving. To be unshakable, Cato needed to see the world's order. That's the last piece of his strength, the Stoic physics. For them, physics wasn't just about stars and stones. It was the study of nature's rational structure. The belief that a divine reason runs through everything, the Logos, from planets moving to a tree growing to a human mind working. They saw the whole cosmos as one living, intelligent organism. Every person, every creature, every city was part of that whole, like a single leaf on a vast, ancient tree. And this wasn't just poetry to them, it was a fact. A scientific and spiritual fact, and that changed how you saw your place. For Cato, this cosmic view grounded his political duty. The Roman Republic, its laws and traditions, wasn't just a human invention. It was a reflection of that natural, rational order. The Constitution mirrored the balance in nature. The laws tried to codify justice, which was a principle of the Logos itself. So when a man like Julius Caesar began to bend those laws, to put his personal ambition above the shared good, Cato didn't just see a political rival. He saw a force of chaos, a rebellion against the rational order of the cosmos. His fight wasn't petty, it was cosmic. He was defending cosmic reason against human tyranny. That belief insulated him from despair. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this later. He reminded himself he was a part of the whole, and nothing that benefited the whole could truly harm the part. What does not benefit the hive, he wrote, does not benefit the bee. Cato lived by that. Even if his actions brought him personal hardship, even if they seemed to fail in the moment, they were aligned with the benefit of the greater whole, the Republic, which was itself part of the natural order. That alignment gave his struggles meaning. You hear it in his speeches. When he argued against radical change or demagoguery, he didn't just quote precedent. He appealed to the mos maiorum, the way of the ancestors. Tradition wasn't blind obedience, but the accumulated wisdom of generations living in harmony with a natural way of governing. He was pointing to a law higher than any senator's will, a law written into the fabric of the world. So what does that mean now, far from Roman politics? It's a shift in perspective. Think about your own role, not in a cosmic sense, but in your immediate world. Your family is a small ecosystem. Your workplace is a community. Your neighborhood is a network. You are a part of these wholes, just as Cato was part of Rome. The Stoic question becomes, how does my action benefit this whole? Not in a grandiose way, but practically, daily. Does my choice bring harmony or discord to my team? Does my behavior strengthen or weaken my family's trust? Do my words add to clarity and reason in a conversation, or to confusion and emotion? Seeing yourself as part of something larger reframes duty. It moves it from a burden to a natural function. A leaf doesn't struggle to photosynthesize, it's just what it does as part of the tree. In the same way, acting with integrity, with justice, with care for your community becomes the most natural thing. It's simply what you do as part of that whole. Cato's iron resolve was forged there. He wasn't just a man with principles. He was a man who saw his principles as threads in the grand tapestry of a rational universe. When you feel that connection, even in a small way, your own resolve gains a deeper anchor. You're no longer just fighting for yourself, you're playing your part in the order of things. The man who looked most bound by rules was, in his philosophy, the freest man in Rome. That's the paradox of Cato. Others sought power to feel in control. He found a deeper sovereignty by binding himself to virtue. Stoic freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's wanting only what aligns with your rational nature. It's autonomy of the will. Epictetus knew the chains of slavery. He said no man is free who is not master of himself, and you are a slave if you submit to anything outside your reasoned choice. By that definition, Caesar, conquering nations, was enslaved to an insatiable ambition. Every victory created a new need. More land, more loyalty, more glory. His freedom was an illusion, contingent on endless external conquest. Cato, bound by his oath to the Republic, was master of his own soul. He couldn't be bribed, so he was free from greed. He couldn't be intimidated, free from fear. His will was his own. This internal kingdom no army could invade. You see it in his choices. A lucrative deal was offered, requiring a slight moral compromise. He walked away, not with resentment, but with the lightness of a man unburdened by temptation. High office was within his grasp. He was indifferent. He served when duty called, but he never campaigned for the title. The office didn't define him, so losing it couldn't diminish him. His freedom was in that detachment. He owned his principles so completely no external reward could purchase his allegiance. This flips our modern idea of freedom. We think freedom means more options, fewer restrictions. The Stoics argue that being pulled in 10 directions by 10 different desires is its own prison. True liberty comes from unifying your desires under a single purpose, living in agreement with nature. When your will is aligned with what is true and just, you are no longer at war with reality. You stop craving what you don't have, fearing what you might lose. That alignment is the ultimate liberation, so consider your own definition. What does freedom mean? Is it the ability to buy something, go somewhere, escape a situation? Or is it the internal state of being undisturbed by those very things? The quiet confidence that comes from knowing your peace isn't held hostage by outside circumstances. Cato's life suggests the latter is the more durable fortress. A freedom built not by acquiring but by relinquishing, not by controlling the world but by mastering your reactions to it. That kind of freedom, once secured, can never be taken. Not by any vote, any market crash, any change in fortune. It is the unassailable liberty of a soul that has chosen its own law. even his enemies had to look at him. Cato's life was this constant, quiet rebuke to their compromises. He wasn't just practicing Stoicism in private, he was performing it. He was consciously modeling the Stoic ideal of the sage. For the Stoics, the sage was a perfect being, someone living in complete harmony with reason and nature, free from error, free from passion. They admitted this was a rarely attained ideal. More of a guiding star, but Cato's relentless, daily pursuit of that star made him something else, a walking, talking embodiment of the philosophy for his entire era. He turned his existence into a public lesson. Every choice, from his simple dress to his defiant votes, was a paragraph in a book written in action, not on papyrus. This had a profound effect. It inspired people looking for a moral compass, and it deeply intimidated those who'd traded their principles for power. His reputation became a force of nature in Roman politics. A man couldn't offer Cato a bribe without feeling foolish, couldn't propose a shady deal in his presence without shame. He made vice feel uncomfortable just by being virtuous. Seneca, writing decades later, treated Cato almost like a mythical hero, cited him constantly as the exemplar of virtue. In one letter, Seneca writes that the universe can produce no greater example of firmness than Cato. He presents him not as a flawless god, but as a man who strained every nerve toward the ideal, a model to measure ourselves against even when we fall short. This modeling had real-world students. Younger men like Marcus Brutus, who'd later play a pivotal role, looked to Cato as a living archetype. They saw in him the possibility that philosophy could be worn in the forum, not just debated in a garden. His integrity was a political weapon because it was genuine. It couldn't be bought, couldn't be negotiated away, so his very presence in the Senate raised the stakes. Forced every other senator to confront their own choices in his stark light. That's the power of conscious modeling. It makes abstract values tangible. You can argue with a theory. It's much harder to argue with a life consistently lived. So think of one person in your own life or from history who embodies a value you deeply admire. It doesn't have to be a famous philosopher, could be a grandparent known for patience, a colleague known for fairness, a historical figure known for courage. What's the specific quality they model, and more importantly, how do they model it? Through what actions, what consistent choices does that value become visible? The lesson from Cato is that we learn virtue not just by reading about it, but by seeing it incarnated, by having a living example that makes the ideal seem just a little more attainable. Your own journey toward any principle is strengthened when you can point to someone and say, "See, it is possible." That person, that model, becomes your personal Seneca. Citing not with words but with a life what a good human being looks like. Stoic resilience usually isn't about being popular. It's often about standing alone. That's the shadow side of Cato's character, the personal cost of that iron consistency. His pursuit of virtue created a distance. He became this island of principle in a sea of political compromise. Even to his allies in the Senate, men who shared his goal of saving the Republic, Cato could be frustrating. They saw a system that needed flexibility. Negotiation, sometimes a little moral bending for a greater good. Cato only saw the bend and he refused it. He was outmaneuvered again and again by more pragmatic men. Like Julius Caesar, who understood charm and patronage and strategic forgiveness. Where others saw a necessary deal, Cato saw a fatal corruption. That rigidity was philosophically pure. But it left him politically isolated. They called him inflexible, a stubborn relic. The loneliness of unwavering principle is a quiet burden. It's the silence after you've said the thing everyone else was thinking but wouldn't say. It's the empty seat at the table because your presence makes the deal-making uncomfortable. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this tension later. He reminded himself in his private journal that it's possible to do the right thing even if no one will ever know. Even if no one will ever approve, your duty, he wrote, is to do the right thing. The rest isn't your concern. Cato lived that. He wasn't waiting for applause. He was answering to a higher court, but the human cost was still real. Think of a moment when his allies proposed a tactical alliance, a temporary partnership with a questionable figure to block a greater threat. Cato would reject it. He'd see the partnership itself as a contamination. His colleagues would throw up their hands. They needed to win, and he was making it impossible. In their eyes, his virtue became a vice, a form of political self-sabotage that humanizes him. It moves him from a marble statue to a flesh and blood man. A man who chose his principles over companionship, over influence, over shared victory. He traded camaraderie for the cold comfort of a clean conscience. So there's a practical question. Have you ever paid a price for sticking to a principle? Maybe you refused to gossip when the group was indulging, and you felt that chill of exclusion. Or you pointed out an ethical shortcut at work and were sidelined for not being a team player. That moment of choosing integrity over belonging, that's a small version of Cato's stand. The cost is real, the loneliness is real, the misunderstanding is real when others call you naive or difficult. How do you reconcile that? The Stoic answer isn't to seek out isolation. It's to understand that some principles by their nature will not be popular. Your peace comes from knowing your self-respect is the only approval that can't be taken from you. The crowd's opinion is a preferred indifferent, but your own judgment of your character, that's the only true good. That internal compass, even when it points you into a headwind, is the source of a deeper belonging. A belonging to your own soul. Cato wasn't unfeeling, he was practicing something specific. The Stoics, they weren't about removing emotion, they were about not being ruled by it. They made this technical distinction between the first spark and the whole fire. They had a word for that first spark, a propassion. It's that involuntary jolt. The sharp breath when you hear bad news, the flash of heat in traffic, that's automatic, you can't stop it. It's like a reflex. Then there's the passion. The full emotion, that's what comes after. When you take that jolt and you agree with its story, you feed it with your thoughts, you let it run for hours. That's where the work is, in that space between the spark and the fire. That gap is where freedom is. Seneca wrote a whole book on anger. He breaks it down. Anger starts with an impression, a sense of being wronged. That's the propassion. Then, he says, we give our assent. We judge it as unfair. We decide we should hit back. That assent is the choice. That's where you can step in. Cato mastered that step. He'd feel the sting of an insult, the heat of a betrayal. He'd allow that sensation. He didn't fight it, but then, before it became a rage that clouded everything, he'd apply reason. He'd examine it. Was this truly an injustice or just an inconvenience? Was it malice or ignorance? What would a reasoned response be, not a reactive one? You see it in the records. There's reported grief. When his brother died, he was affected. He felt the loss. That was the propassion, the human response, but the passion, the consuming despair that would have paralyzed him, he didn't allow that. He channeled it into a renewed focus on his family, his duties. His anger at corruption was famous, but it was a cold, focused anger. It fueled prosecution, not ranting. It was anger used as a tool for justice, not a personal vendetta. That's the transformation, taking that raw, chaotic spark and turning it into a clear, directed force. This is practical. The goal isn't to never feel annoyed or sad. That's impossible. The goal is to observe those initial sensations, to notice the gap. When your boss sends a terse email, feel that jolt of anxiety. That's the propassion. Then pause for one breath. In that pause, you create the space. You withhold immediate assent to the story. Is this a personal attack or just a busy person being direct? What's the most useful way to respond? By practicing this, you widen the gap. You train reason to be the gatekeeper, so pick one small trigger, a long line, a noisy neighbor. a critical comment online. When you feel that first twinge, that's your signal. That's your propassion. Your practice is just to acknowledge it, to say, there it is, and then take that one breath before you do anything. In that breath, you're practicing Cato's art. You're not denying your humanity. You're using its highest faculty, your reason, to choose what you build from those raw materials. Rome slept, and Cato would begin his real work. The audit of his own soul, that was the Stoic practice, the nightly review. After the speeches, the votes, the compromises he saw in others, he'd go into silence. Lay out the day's events in his mind, and judge himself more harshly than any political opponent. It wasn't about punishment, it was about alignment. A daily check to make sure his actions stayed true to his principles, and that his principles were rooted in reason, not just stubbornness. The Stoics had a name for this. Anachoresis, a withdrawal into yourself. Seneca wrote about it to his friend Lucilius. He said to question yourself each night. What bad habit did you cure today? What fault did you resist? In what part are you better? Sleep should come, he wrote, to a self-examined soul, the mind as a judge holding court over the day. This review was the mechanism, continuous, incremental improvement. It stopped small deviations from becoming large corruptions. For a man like Cato, with every public move watched, this private scrutiny was the anchor. It made his famous consistency a conscious choice, not just rigid habit. You see the spirit of it later in Marcus Aurelius. His meditations are an extended nightly review. He's always questioning his own impulses, his reactions to difficult people, his gratitude for simple things, asking if he acted according to nature. If his anger was justified, if his desires were in check. That written dialogue was his method of self-governance. Cato left no diary, but we can imagine a similar silent dialogue. Picture him after a tumultuous day in the Senate. Maybe he delivered a scorching rebuke to a corrupt official. The crowd cheered his moral stand. In his review, he wouldn't bask in that. He'd dissect his own motives. Was my speech driven by a love of justice or a hidden love of theatrical condemnation? Did I seek to correct a wrong or to humiliate an enemy? Was my tone firm and rational, or did I let contempt seep in? That questioning stripped away the ego's disguises. It separated virtuous action from action that just looked virtuous. This practice turns philosophy from a theory you know into a tool you use. It builds self-awareness brick by brick, night by night. Without it, principles become brittle dogmas. With it, they become living, adaptable guides. So how do you start without it feeling like a chore? You could use a simple 3-question template, a starting point. First, ask, what did I do well today? Where did I act with patience or kindness or integrity, however small? Acknowledge that progress. Second, with gentle honesty, where did I fall short? Where did I react with irritation? Choose comfort over duty. Speak without thinking. Identify the misstep without drowning in guilt. Third, and most important, how can I improve tomorrow? What one specific adjustment can I make? Maybe it's taking a deep breath before responding to a provocation, or fulfilling a promise you've been delaying. This isn't about crafting a perfect day. It's about closing the loop between intention and action. It's how you become the guardian of your own character. Making sure the person you are in the quiet moments matches the person you aspire to be in the world. The Stoics said life is a play, and Cato, he was set on playing every part they gave him and playing it well. He wasn't only a senator, he was a soldier too, a husband, a father, a friend, and Stoicism had this framework for that role ethics, the idea that we all hold multiple roles. Each one comes with its own duties. Your job is to understand those roles and to meet the obligations of each one, to do it appropriately without letting them clash. There's an image the Stoic philosopher Hierocles used, concentric circles of concern. The innermost circle is you, then your immediate family, then extended family. Your local community, your country, then all of humanity, and our task, he suggested, is to draw the outer circles inward, to bring the care we have for ourselves out toward those wider circles. But you start where you are, with the roles closest to you. Epictetus gave practical advice on this. In his Enchiridion, he said, remember what role you're playing when you go out in public. Are you a father? Then the duties of a father, that's your script. Are you a brother? Follow that script. He warned against confusing your roles. If you're at the public baths and someone shoves you or says something harsh, don't react like you're in a street fight. Remember, you're there to bathe. His point was context defines duty. Cato embodied this layered approach. His public persona was famously stern, unyielding. That was the duty of the senator, the guardian of law. He played that part to its absolute limit, but in the smaller, inner circles, he showed a different fidelity. Historical accounts note his deep loyalty to friends. He stood by them in their hardships, offering support not as political calculation, but as a personal obligation. As a father, he was deeply dedicated. He took great care in his children's education, their moral upbringing. He saw that as a primary duty. He wasn't a one-note character. He understood that virtue expresses itself differently in the Senate than it does in the home. The same integrity that made him reject a bribe also made him a reliable friend. The same discipline that had him walking barefoot in the rain was channeled into providing steadfast guidance for his family. This nuance is what keeps Stoicism from becoming cold or detached. It grounds philosophy in the messy reality of human relationships. Your duty to your community doesn't cancel your duty to your family. It complements it. One role prepares you for the other. The patience you practice as a parent can inform the patience you need as a colleague. The fairness you strive for as a citizen can be practiced first in your own household. So here's a reflective prompt. Take a moment, list your own key roles, not just your job title. Think of yourself as a professional, yes, but also as a family member. A friend, a neighbor, a citizen of your town or your country. Now, with gentle honesty, consider one of those circles. Are you neglecting any of the quiet duties that come with it? Maybe the role of a friend calls for a check-in you've been putting off. The role of a community member might ask for a small contribution of time or attention that you've avoided. The goal isn't to load yourself with guilt. It's to bring awareness, to see your life not as a single monolithic identity, but as a tapestry of roles. Each one an opportunity to practice virtue in a different, necessary way. By consciously stepping into each part, you honor the whole play, and you build a character like Cato's that isn't rigid but resiliently adaptable. Ready for every scene life writes for you. Long before cold showers became a trend, Cato was already using discomfort as a kind of training for the soul. It wasn't about punishment, it was a deliberate practice the Stoics called ascesis, like building a callus on the mind. You choose small hardships voluntarily, so you become immune to the larger ones that fortune might send. It's a form of inoculation. You take a tiny, controlled dose of difficulty, so when a real challenge comes, your whole system doesn't go into shock. Seneca wrote about this. He advised practicing poverty. Set aside a few days each month, he said, to be content with the cheapest food, the coarsest clothing, and then ask yourself, is this what I was so afraid of? The point is to discover that the baseline of what you actually need is much lower than you think, that your happiness isn't held captive by your comforts. Another teacher, Musonius Rufus, said hardship is necessary for virtue. Just like physical training is for an athlete, the soul is strengthened by effort and struggle. Cato took this from philosophy into his daily life. His habits were his workout. In the bitter cold of a Roman winter, while other senators bundled up, Cato would wear no tunic under his toga. He walked barefoot through the city, feeling the chill of the stones. He didn't do it for show. It was a private exercise in endurance. When he commanded troops, he ate the same simple rations as the lowest soldier. He marched with them carrying his own gear. He slept on a hard cot. This wasn't just leadership by example. It was a constant rehearsal. He was reminding his body and mind that luxury was optional. That his spirit didn't depend on a soft bed or a warm cloak. This practice builds a deep kind of confidence. It's the knowledge that if you lost everything tomorrow, you'd be okay. Your core self would remain. You've already proven it to yourself in small ways, and then the comfort you do have becomes a gift to enjoy, not a necessity you cling to with anxiety. So here's a practical challenge. This week, choose one small, voluntary hardship. It could be a 1-minute cold shower, or leaving your phone in another room for an evening. Eating a very simple meal, walking instead of driving for a short errand. The point isn't the act itself, it's the observation that follows. Notice your initial resistance. The part of you that complains, then notice the moment after you begin. The realization that you are, in fact, fine. You are enduring it. That space between the complaint and the endurance is where resilience is built. It's where you learn that most of your suffering comes from the anticipation, not the experience itself. By doing this, you aren't making your life worse. You're giving yourself the gift of freedom, freedom from the fear of losing what you have. Cato faced this every day. In the Roman Forum, political opponents would attack his character. They mocked his austere lifestyle. They called his Stoic principles an act, a pretense. The noise was constant, and his response was to turn their venom into a demonstration. His own philosophy in practice, he applied the discipline of assent, specifically to the impression of an insult. That first sting, the flash of heat when you hear a liar, that's automatic. The Stoics called that a propassion, but the lasting hurt, the anger that comes after, that comes from our judgment, our assent to the idea that the insult matters. That it defines us, or that it can damage our true self. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this later. He reminded himself that the opinion of others is not within our control. He said to consider the source. When someone speaks ill of you, it says more about their character, their own turmoil, not about yours. He wrote that you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize that, and you find strength. Cato lived by that strength. Historical accounts describe him being openly mocked for his simple dress, his serious demeanor. Once, an opponent threw a handful of figs at him during a speech, called him a dreary philosopher. Cato didn't rage. He didn't launch into a defense. He paused, and with a calm more powerful than any shout, he simply continued his point. Another time, during a stream of personal slander, he sat quietly. Reading a book, his silence wasn't weakness, it was a statement. He was showing their words held no power to disrupt his inner peace. In his Stoic view, they were external noise. Like wind or market chatter, they could be observed, but they didn't require a reaction that compromised his virtue. That's the practical shift. When criticism comes, the Stoic asks 3 questions. First, is this true? Often, insults are exaggerations, projections. If there's a kernel of truth, it's an opportunity for self-improvement, not a cause for shame. Second, is this within my control? You can't control what others say, only your response. And third, the most important, does this harm my virtue? An insult only harms you if you let it provoke you into anger, spite, vengeance. If you respond with reason and integrity, your virtue remains untouched. The insult fails. So think of a recent criticism from a colleague, a family member, a stranger online. Write it down, apply the Stoic lens, ask, is this entirely true? Is there any part I can use for growth? Then acknowledge what's outside your control, the other person's opinion, their choice to express it. Finally, ask, did I respond in a way that aligns with my character? This process doesn't erase the initial sting, but it places a frame of reason around it. It transforms a personal attack from a wound into data you can choose to learn from, or simply let pass by. like Cato letting the shouted insults fall on ears that refused to hear them as anything but the weather. The weather of other people's minds. Cato lived with this idea every day that his time was limited. The Stoics had a name for it, Memento Mori, remembering you will die. They didn't see it as something morbid. They saw it as a way to clear everything else away, to focus on what actually matters. Marcus Aurelius later, he'd think about this every morning. He'd write about emperors, kings, all of them gone now, the fame of Hadrian just a whisper, all of us are just passing through, soon we'll be the ancestors. That thought, it wasn't meant to make him sad, it was meant to wake him up. If my time is this short, what should I actually be doing? For Cato, the answer was always the same. The Republic, that urgency he had, that frantic defense of the old ways, it came from that awareness. He saw the Republic as something alive, something that could die. And he saw his own life as this brief chance to be its guardian. Every speech he gave, every prosecution, every stand he took alone, it was all done knowing that both he and the thing he loved were temporary. That gave his actions a kind of purity. He didn't have time for the long political games, no patience for building some dynasty that would last beyond him. His legacy wasn't a name on a stone, it was a principle shown in time, his final act taking his own life. That was the fullest expression of this. It wasn't running from life. It was choosing to meet the inevitable on his own terms. He made his last moments a final lesson in autonomy, showing that even the end could be met with a reasoned choice. So it's a quiet question. If you really felt how finite your time is, what one thing would you move toward, and what one distraction would you finally drop, seeing it for the small thing it is? Memento Mori, it's holding that awareness lightly, not as a weight but as a lens, something that brings what's important into sharp focus, right here. An Iron Man isn't just standing alone, he becomes something others can build on. Cato's deepest legacy, it wasn't his solitary stands, it was the community he inspired. Stoicism, it focuses on the inner citadel, but it's not a philosophy of isolation. It thrives on shared learning, on living examples, and Cato became that example. His life, his choices, they became a living textbook for a whole generation of Romans who saw in him a different kind of power, men like Marcus Junius Brutus. He later played a pivotal role in history. He looked to Cato not just as a political ally but as a personal archetype. Brutus was his nephew. He modeled himself on Cato's austere integrity. He even married Cato's daughter. Here was a young man of immense wealth and privilege, choosing a life of philosophical discipline because he saw it embodied in someone he respected. That's how a school of thought moves from pages to people, through human connection, through visible proof. Decades after Cato's passing, his influence only grew. The philosopher Seneca, he was tasked with advising the young Emperor Nero. He constantly used Cato as his North Star. In his essays and letters, he holds Cato up as the unattainable ideal, the man against whom we measure our own progress. He writes to Nero not about abstract theory, but about a real man who walked the same streets. Seneca tells the most powerful man in the world to look at a senator who died defying absolute power. He presents Cato's choices as the model of true freedom. This is remarkable. A philosopher serving at the pleasure of an autocrat uses the memory of that autocrat's greatest ideological enemy as a lesson in good governance. It speaks to the magnetic power of a consistent character. Cato's legacy became a tool for moral instruction at the highest levels, long after his voice was silent. This collective spirit gave rise to what historians later called the Stoic opposition, a loose group of senators and thinkers in the early empire. They saw themselves as the philosophical heirs to Cato's republican ideals. They didn't necessarily plot revolution, but they practiced a quiet, persistent resistance. They used their philosophical training to maintain inner freedom under rulers they could not remove. They wore their simple Stoic dress as a silent rebuke to imperial extravagance. They saw themselves as keepers of a flame Cato had lit. His posthumous reputation became a banner, a symbol that virtue could survive and even define itself against overwhelming political force. So here's a quiet question: who is watching you, not in a paranoid sense but in a human one? Through your daily actions, your small choices of integrity or patience, how you handle disappointment, you are writing a textbook for someone, a child, a colleague, a friend. Even a stranger who notices how you carry yourself. You may never know whose world you are quietly shaping, just by trying to live according to your principles. Cato likely didn't set out to create a movement. He was just being relentlessly, unapologetically himself. Yet that very consistency built a community he never officially led. It built a legacy that outlived the empire he tried to save. Your own philosophy, your own code, it gains its deepest meaning not when you lock it away, but when it subtly, inevitably, begins to echo in the lives of others. That is how an iron pillar supports a wider roof. The Stoics placed practical wisdom above all. They called it phronsis. It was knowing the right thing to do in the right way at the right time. That required flexibility. It needed a deep understanding of human nature. So from that Stoic view, we can ask a question about Cato. Did his iron will become a limitation? Did his commitment to principle ever lack that practical wisdom? The wisdom needed to actually achieve a good end. This isn't about undermining his character. It's about completing the picture. Stoicism says virtue is the only good, but it also says wisdom is a cardinal virtue. A wise action is a virtuous one. So if an action, however principled, leads to a worse outcome for everyone, was it truly the wisest choice? This is where a critique from within the tradition appears. Seneca revered Cato, but Seneca also wrote extensively on clemency. He served as an advisor to an emperor, a role that demanded compromise. In his work on mercy, he argues that rigid, unyielding justice can sometimes be a form of cruelty. True strength, he suggests, includes the capacity for leniency when it serves a greater restorative purpose. He never names Cato directly, but the implication lingers. A figure so unbending might lack the tactical sense, the sense needed to navigate a complex world toward a better state. We see this tension in Cato's political methods. His obstructionism in the Senate is legendary. He would filibuster for hours, reading entire scrolls aloud to block proposals he deemed unconstitutional. To him, this was defending the law. To his opponents, and even to some allies, it was a refusal to engage, a refusal to do the necessary work of governance. Some historians have suggested that his absolute opposition to figures like Caesar and Pompey actually helped polarize the political climate. It made constructive debate impossible. It painted every issue in stark, moral black and white, leaving no room for the gray areas, the areas where political solutions are often found. So from a pragmatic Stoic view, one focused on the welfare of the Republic as a preferred indifferent, could his tactics be seen as a failure of phronsis? Did his unwavering stand for the ideal inadvertently make the ideal's survival less likely? That's the nuanced lesson. An iron will is a magnificent tool. But like any tool, its value depends on how it's applied. Unbending principle is necessary to build a trustworthy character. Yet in the realm of action, especially action involving other people, pure rigidity can sometimes break what it seeks to protect. The Stoic sage was meant to be like a skilled sailor, adjusting the sails to the wind, not stubbornly trying to sail straight into a storm because that was the original course. The goal is to reach the destination, a just and harmonious outcome, not merely to prove the strength of the mast so you can reflect on your own experience. Think of a time you held a principled position, maybe in a disagreement with a family member or a stance at work. You knew you were right on the principle. But did holding that line absolutely without a hint of flexibility actually bring about a good resolution, or did it create a hardened conflict where progress became impossible? The exercise isn't to regret holding the principle, it's to gently examine whether practical wisdom, phronses, might have suggested a different method. A way to uphold the core truth while leaving a door open, a door for the other person to walk through. That's the balancing act between the iron that defines your spine and the supple strength that allows you to move effectively through the world. Cato died, and with that death he left a question hanging over this new era of emperors. The republic he knew was over. Julius Caesar had won the civil war. The old way, with power shared among senators, was collapsing into rule by one man. For Cato, to live under that would have been a contradiction. It would mean accepting that his whole life's fight, his very identity, was now meaningless. So his last act was a statement. It was the final, absolute use of the only freedom he had left, the freedom to choose how he left. That last night he wasn't desperate. He was a philosopher finishing an argument. He ate with friends talking about the soul. He read from Plato's writing on its immortality. Then he went to his room, and with a calm, terrible resolve, he took his own life. It was the ultimate Stoic act of assent. He judged that a life of compromised principle was no life at all, and he withheld his consent from living it. This was a performative act of freedom. By ending his life, he denied Caesar the ultimate power, the power to pardon him, the power to force him into the spectacle of gratitude. To be paraded in a triumph as a captured prize, Caesar wanted to show mercy, to demonstrate his magnanimity by sparing his greatest critic. Cato's suicide stole that narrative. It made Caesar's mercy a hollow gesture. It said, "You cannot forgive me because I do not recognize your authority to judge me. My freedom is mine to keep, even in this final form." In that moment, Cato changed from a defeated senator into a martyr, a symbol of republican liberty that no imperial decree could erase. Seneca, writing decades later, spent a lot of time defending this choice. Not as despair, but as supreme rationality. He wrote that for a wise person, the door is always open. When life forces you to choose between compromising your virtue and leaving, the honorable exit is the rational one. He asked, why wait for the slow decay of the body when the conditions for a virtuous life are gone? For Cato, the condition for his virtuous life was a free republic. With that gone, his role was gone. His death was the logical end of his philosophy, a final proof that some principles are worth more than biological existence. The impact was immediate, and it lasted. Historical accounts say Caesar was genuinely disturbed by the news. He reportedly said, "Cato, I grudge you your death as you grudged me the opportunity of saving your life." Cato's ghost haunted the new regime. His name became a rallying cry. For the conspirators who killed Caesar on the Ides of March, they saw themselves as avenging Cato. Brutus, his nephew and philosophical heir, was at the center of it. For generations after, under the emperors, dissidents and philosophers would invoke Cato's name. He became the legendary standard of resistance, proof that one could say no to absolute power, even if only with a final breath. His legend grew precisely because the republic he died for was gone. He became the eternal reminder of what was lost. This leaves a difficult philosophical question. Is there a modern equivalent of losing a cause worth such a definitive, final stand of principle? We're not talking about literal self-harm, but the symbolic death of a role, an identity, a deeply held belief system. Think of a founder who walks away from their own company when it abandons its core ethics for profit. That's a kind of professional suicide, a symbolic death of their original dream. An artist who destroys their own work rather than let it be corrupted by commercial demands. A whistleblower who sacrifices their entire career to expose a truth, knowing they'll never work in their field again. These are modern forms of Cato's final stand. They represent the conscious choice to let one version of yourself die, to preserve the integrity of what you believed in. The question isn't about the physical act. It's about the moment you look at a compromised future and decide, I cannot go there. My principles and that future cannot coexist. And so you choose your principles and you accept the consequence, which is the end of a certain path. That's the enduring, challenging legacy of Cato's symbolic end. It asks how far we're willing to go to remain the authors of our own story, even when the final chapter is the hardest one to write. You don't need a toga, you don't need a senate. The idea is an inner citadel, something solid. Cato's world, the marble forums, the civil wars, that's gone. But the challenges he faced, they're familiar. That pressure to bend your ethics for a promotion, the shock of a setback, something that threatens to unravel you. The daily temptation to trade long-term integrity for short-term approval. His Stoicism wasn't for a lost republic. It was a toolkit for human dignity. And that toolkit it translates directly. Think of his political integrity. That's the modern whistleblower, reporting misconduct, knowing it could cost a career. It's the small business owner who refuses to cut corners on safety, even when competitors are undercutting on price. It's giving honest feedback to a friend when flattery would be easier. The core is the same. You take an action because it's right. The external reward or punishment is secondary. His resilience that maps onto our own crises. A sudden job loss, a difficult diagnosis, the end of a relationship. These are our versions of exile, of defeat. The Stoic response isn't to pretend you don't feel the blow. It's to apply the discipline of assent. You feel the initial shock, the fear, the grief, the propassion, and then, in the space that follows, you choose your judgment. You ask, what's within my control here? My effort to find a new path, my attitude toward treatment, my capacity for self-care, and what is not, the market conditions. The biology of an illness, another person's feelings. You focus your energy solely on the first category. You reclaim agency. You stop being a victim of the event. You become an active participant in your response. Modern writers make this bridge explicit. Ryan Holiday, in The Obstacle is the Way, frames challenges as fuel. He writes that the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. That's pure Cato, seeing every hardship as raw material. For practicing virtue, Massimo Pigliucci, he emphasizes that Stoicism is for everyday life. It's not about grand gestures. It's the micro choices, how you react to a rude comment online, how you handle a delayed flight, how you manage your desire for the latest gadget or the perfect vacation. These are the training grounds. Take a practical scenario. You're in a tense meeting. A colleague publicly dismisses your idea with a sarcastic remark. The old reaction is a flush of anger, a defensive counter-attack, or a retreat into silence. The Cato-inspired response begins with one breath. You notice the sting. You feel the heat rise. That's the propassion. Then you withhold immediate assent. You examine the impression. Is this a personal attack, or is this person stressed and clumsy? What does the situation need? Does it need a heated argument or a calm restatement of your point focused on the project's goal? Choosing the latter isn't weakness, it's exercising immense strength. You're directing the situation, not being directed by your own triggered nerves. Another application is in desire. Cato practiced voluntary discomfort. You can translate that by consciously reducing your dependency on external comforts. A digital detox for a weekend, cooking simple meals instead of ordering takeout every night, walking or biking for short trips instead of driving. The goal isn't austerity for its own sake. It's the discovery that your baseline contentment is more resilient than you thought. You realize your peace isn't held hostage by constant convenience. So here's a prompt for this week. Look at the qualities that define Cato: unwavering integrity, calm resilience, focused duty, principled courage, choose just one. The one that whispers to you as an area for growth. Now plan a single, concrete action to practice it. If you choose integrity, your action might be to keep a small promise you've been putting off, or to speak a truthful but difficult sentence in a conversation. If you choose resilience, it might be to mentally rehearse a potential setback at work. And write down 3 things within your control if it happens. If it's duty, it could be performing one unnoticed chore for your household without expecting any recognition. The action itself is almost unimportant in its scale. What matters is the conscious choice, the deliberate rehearsal of the virtue. That's how you move philosophy from the page into the pulse of your daily life. One chosen action at a time, you begin to forge your own version of an unshakable character. The mind of a Stoic isn't quiet, it's more like a council chamber. You could listen to the thoughts that fortified Cato before a vote, before a battle. This is where the philosophy was lived. Between the impression of an event and his final action, there was a conversation. A deliberate one, a dialogue with himself. Picture the night before a decisive confrontation. The reports are grim. Pompey's forces are scattered. Caesar's legions are advancing. The Republic seems lost. An advisor urges a retreat, a compromise, to live and fight another day. The first impression hits Cato's mind like a wave. All is lost. Flee, save yourself. That's the passion, the raw impulse. But then the inner guardian speaks, the voice of reason trained by discipline. It doesn't shout. It questions, is this impression true? That's the question from Epictetus. Examine it. Is the Republic truly lost, or is its fate just uncertain? My duty was to defend its principles, not just to survive until tomorrow. What is within my power? I cannot control the outcome of the battle. I can control whether I stand where a Roman senator ought to stand. He might recall the words he read. Marcus Aurelius would later write them down. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The strength isn't in changing the storm. It's in choosing how to stand within it. The dialogue continues, turning to duty. What is my role? I am not just a soldier hoping for victory. I am a guardian of the laws. If I flee now, what do I teach my sons? That principle is disposable when danger arrives. That our word is only good in fair weather. My role in this play is the defender. I must play it well to the end, regardless of how the audience reacts. Then, the Premeditation of Evils. He walks through the worst case calmly, and if I am captured, I have rehearsed this. Caesar will offer a pardon. He will wish to display his mercy. To accept it would be to validate his unlawful authority. It would make a mockery of every speech I have given. So capture is not an option. My freedom remains my own to keep, even in the final act. This isn't despair, it's clarity. Finally, the alignment of desire. What do I truly wish for? Do I wish for personal safety, or for a character unbroken by circumstance? The Stoic seeks to wish for events as they happen. Amor Fati, I wish for the strength to meet this hour with the virtue it demands. If this is the final test, then let me be grateful for the chance to prove my philosophy was not just words. This inner dialogue transforms panic into resolve. The frantic energy of fear is channeled into a steady current of purpose. He is not unafraid. He is simply more committed to his reasoned choice than he is to the sensation of his fear. You can practice this before a difficult conversation, a high-stakes presentation, a personal challenge where emotions run high. Write your own Stoic inner dialogue. Find a quiet moment and put pen to paper. Start with the first impression. Name it. I'm going to fail. They will reject me. This pain will overwhelm me. Write it down plainly, then let your inner guardian respond. Ask the Stoic questions. Is this thought completely true, or just one interpretation? What part of this situation is truly within my control? My preparation, my honesty, my effort, my attitude. What is not the other person's reaction, the market's whims, the biology of grief? Define your role. Not as a victim of the event, but as an active participant. What is the duty of a good professional in this meeting? The duty of a caring friend in this conflict? The duty of a resilient human facing this loss? Play that role. Walk through the worst case briefly. If the feared outcome happens, what then? What would I still control? My next choice, my values, my breath. Finally, align your desire. State what you truly wish for, not for a specific, uncontrollable outcome, but for the strength to act with integrity, no matter the outcome. I wish to be clear and kind. I wish to be courageous. I wish to accept what comes with grace. This written dialogue isn't magic, it's training. It builds the mental muscle that Cato spent a lifetime strengthening. It moves philosophy from a concept you admire to a voice you can hear, guiding you from within when the outer world grows loud. Cato saw a soft body as a potential enemy to a strong mind. And this wasn't just a personal quirk, it was a core Stoic principle. The philosophy he followed insisted that mind and body weren't separate kingdoms at war. They were a single, integrated system. A weakness in one created a vulnerability in the other. You could not, they believed, cultivate an iron will while indulging a body trained only for comfort. That Roman ideal, a sound mind in a sound body, wasn't just a nice saying. It was a practical blueprint for virtue. A body accustomed to luxury would whisper demands for ease at the very moment the mind needed to choose hardship. A body weakened by neglect would fail to carry out the duties a principled mind had set. Cato's entire lifestyle was a defense against that internal betrayal. His physical austerity was the foundation of his mental citadel. The Stoic teacher Musonius Rufus was explicit about this. He gave lectures arguing that physical training was absolutely necessary for a philosopher. Not for vanity or athletic glory, but as training for the soul. He said that just as a craftsman needs the right tools for his work, a philosopher needs a body in good condition. To endure hardship, to perform duties, to be free from the distracting complaints of poor health. He taught that through labor, sweat, and simple living, we practice the endurance our minds will later call upon in crisis. Seneca echoed this. He wrote about moderating the body's demands. He advised not to pamper the body too much, or it becomes a master instead of a partner. He wrote that we should be able to bear heat and cold, plain food, and a hard bed, not to seek them out constantly, but to know we can withstand them. This knowledge itself is a form of power. It removes the fear of discomfort. It makes you less manipulable because your peace cannot be threatened by the withdrawal of a physical comfort. You see this philosophy made flesh in Cato's daily choices. When he commanded troops, he didn't ride in a commander's carriage while his men marched. He marched with them, he carried his own pack, he ate the same coarse bread and lentils. This wasn't a publicity stunt, it was an exercise in shared endurance. It kept his body attuned to the reality of his soldiers' lives, and it silently reinforced the Stoic lesson that leadership is service, not privilege. His sleep was famously minimal. He would rise long before dawn, using the quiet hours for study and planning while others slept. His diet was simple and modest, avoiding the lavish feasts that were common among the senatorial class. These weren't acts of self-punishment. They were deliberate calibrations. He was tuning his physical instrument so it would not cry out for attention when his mind was focused on a matter of justice or state. This holistic discipline created a feedback loop. The physical toughness built mental confidence. The mental resolve made the physical hardships feel insignificant. Each march in the cold, each night of short sleep on a hard cot, was a deposit in a bank of resilience. When a political crisis hit, when he had to stand for hours in the forum facing a hostile crowd, his body was not a liability. It was an ally. It didn't signal fatigue or discomfort to his opponents. It stood like his mind, unmoved. The potential for distraction was minimized. His entire being was oriented toward a single purpose. So here is a quiet, practical invitation. Look at one of your own foundational physical habits. Not with judgment, but with curiosity. Choose one: sleep, diet, or basic movement. How is it currently serving your mental resilience? Does a pattern of poor sleep leave you irritable and quick to assent to negative impressions the next day? Does a diet that relies on constant convenience make your energy unstable, your focus scattered? Does a lack of basic movement leave your body feeling like a sluggish weight rather than a responsive instrument? The goal isn't to launch a drastic overhaul. It's to make one small, conscious adjustment. Perhaps it's committing to just 15 more minutes of sleep tonight, or replacing one processed snack with a piece of fruit. Or taking a 10-minute walk outside, not for exercise, but simply to remind your body it can move with intention. This small act is a signal. It's you beginning to repair the connection between your physical vessel and your conscious will. You start to build, in a very real way, your own foundation for an unshakable character. One where your body doesn't argue with your principles, but quietly, reliably supports them. Cato's greatest weapon was silence. That wasn't shyness. It was a discipline, a Stoic discipline, the careful management of speech. For the Stoics, the tongue was a powerful tool. A dangerous tool. It required constant vigilance. You should speak only what is true, what is necessary, what is kind. Anything outside that was a leak of energy, a source of regret, or a needless provocation. Cato understood this. In Roman politics, men built reputations on hours of ornate oratory. The most powerful statement could be a well-timed pause, a refusal to engage, a sentence so concise it cut through the noise like a blade. Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, taught we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. We should listen twice as much as we speak. Epictetus gave practical rules. He warned against speaking about trivial things, especially about other people. Be mostly silent, he said, or speak only what is necessary and in few words. He advised to rarely speak about yourself. Praising yourself is boastful. Blaming yourself is weak. The goal was to conserve energy, to avoid being pulled into gossip or argument or self-aggrandizement. Speech was an action. Like all actions, it had to be chosen virtuously. Cato wielded this with devastating effect. He was famous for a laconic style. Other senators filled the air with flattery, legal references, emotional appeals. Cato's speeches were direct, unadorned. He would stand, state his position with stark clarity, then sit down. There's a famous phrase, "Carthage must be destroyed." That was actually his great-grandfather, Cato the Elder. He ended every speech with that line, but the younger Cato inherited the spirit. He had his own signature refrains. He would return relentlessly to constitutional principle. He wouldn't be drawn into debates about personality. He spoke to the issue, only the issue. And when discussion descended into petty insults, he would do something more powerful than any rebuttal. He would open a scroll and start reading, or simply get up and walk out. His silence in those moments was a judgment louder than any shout. It declared the proceedings unworthy of his attention and beneath the dignity of the Senate itself. That restraint projected an immense strength. In a culture that valued verbal prowess, his refusal to play the game was disarming. It made the long-winded speeches of his opponents seem like what they often were, performative noise. His brevity forced people to listen more closely. Every word carried weight because there were so few of them, and his strategic silence denied his enemies a target. You cannot argue with a man who chooses not to speak. You cannot twist words he never said, that conserved his energy for the battles that truly mattered. You can bring this discipline into a modern meeting, a family dinner, a social media thread. The challenge is to practice mindful speech for just one day. Before you speak, insert a tiny pause, a half breath. In that space, ask the Stoic filter, is what I'm about to say true? Is it necessary for this moment? Is it kind or at least not harmful? You'll be shocked at how much commentary, complaint, and casual judgment fails that test. This isn't about becoming mute. It's about upgrading communication from reactive noise to intentional signal. You might find your fewer words carry more authority, that your listening becomes more attentive, and that you exit conversations feeling centered rather than drained. In a world drowning in words, the disciplined choice of when to speak and what to say becomes a source of power, a source of peace. Death fixed Cato's image, but it was a contested legacy. In life, he was a polarizing senator. In death, he became a symbol, and symbols get claimed by everyone. His friends, his fiercest enemies, they started shaping his memory before his body was cold. Cicero, the great orator, he was often at odds with Cato's methods. But he delivered a powerful eulogy. He praised Cato's unwavering virtue, called him the one man who brought back the ancient severity of morals. But even Cicero hinted at the practical cost of that rigidity. Caesar, of course, wrote his own version. In his account of the Civil War, he paints Cato as a stubborn obstructionist, a man whose outdated idealism helped cause the very chaos he claimed to oppose. Caesar needed to justify his own victory, so he framed Cato's principled stand as a kind of fanaticism, a dangerous refusal to accept the new reality. So from the start, there were two Catos, the martyr of liberty and the deluded relic. His legacy was a battlefield of interpretation. Then came the poets and the philosophers. They lifted him from politics into myth. The epic poem Pharsalia by Lucan, written under Nero's rule, it turned Cato into a Stoic superhero. Lucan writes of Cato leading his weary troops through the African desert, a living embodiment of virtue untouched by hardship. He describes Cato as more content than any Roman ever was with wealth, because he found his riches within. The poem declares, the victorious cause pleased the gods, but the defeated cause pleased Cato. That line captures the entire Stoic ideal. Success is a preferred indifferent. But moral victory is the only true good. Lucan's Cato is no longer a flawed politician. He is a walking principle, a literary monument. This was how Stoicism wanted to remember its greatest exemplar. Not for his political wins, which were few, but for the sheer, awe-inspiring consistency of his character. For centuries after, thinkers wrestled with this legacy. The early Christian theologian Augustine, centuries later, he grappled with Cato's suicide. He admired Cato's love of liberty, his courage, but from a Christian viewpoint he saw the act as a sin, a proud rejection of God's gift of life. Augustine's critique sparked a debate. It echoed through the Renaissance and into the Enlightenment. Was Cato's final act the ultimate expression of free will, or a tragic failure of hope? Each era answered according to its own values. To republicans, he was a hero. To monarchists, a cautionary tale. To philosophers, he was the ultimate case study. A man who tested the limits of a human will bound only by its own moral code. This evolution into an icon asks a quiet, personal question. How do you wish to be remembered? Not for your job title, or your possessions, or even your accomplishments which fade, but for the quality of your character. When people speak of you after you're gone, what single trait would you hope defines their memory? Would it be your integrity, like Cato, your compassion, your resilience, your curiosity? His story suggests we are remembered not for the flexibility of our compromises, but for the clarity of our deepest commitments. Those commitments lived daily. They are what carve our image into the memory of others long after we are gone. Imagine Cato choosing tranquility over duty. The ancient world had other options. Epicureanism taught that the highest good was ataraxia, this serene tranquility, free from fear. It was about a wise withdrawal from public life, finding pleasure in modest friendship, simple food, reflection in a quiet garden. Then there was skepticism. It taught the suspension of judgment. Since certainty was impossible, the wise course was to withhold assent from all dogmatic beliefs, cultivate peace through constant doubt. Both offered a kind of peace, a retreat from the political storm that consumed Cato, but that retreat would have made a different man. An Epicurean Cato, valuing tranquility above all, would have left the Senate. Retired to a country estate with friends, discussing philosophy away from power. His duty would have been to his own peace of mind. Political conflict was an unnecessary disturbance to avoid. A skeptical Cato would have been paralyzed by his principles. Faced with a crisis, he might have endlessly debated all sides, suspended judgment on whether Caesar was a threat or a savior. He could never have taken those unwavering stands. His famous certainty would have dissolved. Stoicism provided the framework for an iron will because it wasn't a philosophy of retreat. It was a philosophy of engagement. Its highest good wasn't tranquility, but virtue, excellence of character, expressed through action. Duty wasn't a distraction from the good life. It was the very arena where the good life was lived. For the Stoic, tranquility was a byproduct, not the goal. This is why Seneca, a Stoic, critiqued the Epicurean withdrawal. He wrote that the wise person is not a recluse. Doesn't hide away, he is made for society, for action, for bearing public burdens. To retire while still useful, Seneca argued, is a form of cowardice. The Stoic sage enters the fray not because he enjoys conflict, but because it's his nature to act justly within the human community. Cato's entire life was a testament to this active principle. His iron character was forged in the heat of the Senate, not in the shade of a garden. His resilience wasn't the quiet peace of avoiding hardship, but the robust strength of meeting hardship head-on. Using it to temper his soul, the virtue he sought wasn't a private possession, but a public performance, a continuous test. So it's not about which philosophy is right. It's about which approach resonates. There are seasons for withdrawal and contemplation, for healing, and there are seasons for stepping into the arena, for taking a stand, for bearing duty. Which pull feels stronger now? The pull toward a peaceful, protected space for yourself and those close to you, or the pull toward engaging with a larger community, accepting a difficult role, acting on principle even when it costs comfort? Neither is wrong, but understanding the difference clarifies the source of Cato's strength. His iron wasn't mined in solitude. It was smelted in the public forge of duty and hammered on the anvil of relentless action. That's what Stoicism demanded of him. Cato's legacy isn't about copying his life. It's about taking the process that built it. That process was a daily system. A series of small choices. Over time, they forge an unshakable character. You can think of it as your own inner forge, a place where you temper integrity through consistent action. It doesn't need a political crisis. It thrives on an ordinary Tuesday. Epictetus put it plainly. He said, "If you wish to be a person of integrity, you must work at it." Every single hour. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that our life is lived only in this present moment, in the now, so the work is always now. This is the synthesis. A practical framework from the disciplines we've seen. It has 3 phases: the morning intention, the daily application, the evening review. Start with the morning. Before the noise begins, take 2 minutes. In the quiet, set a simple intention, not a to-do list, a quality you wish to embody. Today, I will practice patience. Or today, I will speak only what is necessary. Or today, I will accept what I cannot change. This plants the seed. It directs your proherses, your faculty of choice, toward a specific virtue. Then move into the day's application. This is where you run the drills. You don't need grand gestures. Choose 3 small practices, 1 act of withheld assent. The next time you feel irritation in traffic or online, pause for 1 breath. Observe the impression. Choose not to let it dictate your mood. 1 fulfilled duty. Identify 1 small obligation you've been avoiding. a message to send, a household task, complete it promptly, as an exercise in following through, one moment of negative visualization. When you sit down to a meal or hug a loved one, pause. Briefly acknowledge this is not guaranteed. Let that deepen your gratitude for its presence now. These are micro workouts for your Stoic muscles. Finally, the evening review. As Cato did, lay out the day's events. Ask gently, where did I live up to my intention? Where did I fall short? Not to punish, to learn. Did that withheld assent create space for a reasoned response? Did completing that duty bring a sense of alignment? This reflection closes the loop. It turns experience into wisdom. So here is a challenge for the next month. Design your own Ironman challenge, but focus on one core Stoic discipline. Perhaps it's the discipline of desire. For 30 days, practice one small voluntary hardship each week. A cold shower, a digital Sabbath, a simple meal. Observe how your relationship with comfort shifts, or choose the discipline of action. For 30 days, identify and fulfill one neglected duty each day. No matter how small, see how it strengthens your sense of integrity. The system is the point. It's not about becoming a Roman senator. It's about using the same principles to build a character that can hold firm in your own world. A character that, like iron, is strong and adaptable, forged not in a single fire but in the steady, daily heat of chosen virtue. Cato's life shows you something. His will wasn't something he was born with. It was something he built every day using Stoic philosophy. He started young in a republic that was falling apart. And he decided piece by piece to build an inner fortress that couldn't be taken. The plan was straightforward: virtue as the only real good, the three disciplines, assent, action, desire, as the tools. Amor Fati, loving your fate, as the fuel, and his own life as the evidence. He proved that an unshakable character isn't discovered, it's made through thousands of small choices. To act with integrity, to judge with reason, to accept with courage whatever happens. Seneca, who came after him, understood this best. Writing about Cato's defiance, he said, "It's not that he couldn't yield to what was wrong. It's that he couldn't yield at all." That's the center of it. For Cato, the direction of his will was fixed, pointed toward principle, and once it was set, it couldn't be moved. Not from stubbornness, but because he only gave his assent to virtue. Everything else, threats, bribes, the direction of history, that was just weather. Beating against the wall of his character. So what's left for us here and now? It's the same invitation, to choose a direction and to hold to it. Your arena might be an office, a classroom, your own home. Your test might be a missed deadline, a personal loss, a moment of ethical pressure. The scale changes, the human challenge doesn't. To align your actions with your principles, especially when it costs you. To see hardship as material, something to build with, not an injustice to fight against. To become, in your own world, a quiet force of integrity. Someone whose simple consistency makes compromise feel unnatural and resilience feel within reach. If Cato's story stirs something in you, that's the call. Which of his qualities seems hardest to build or most compelling to try? That's where the work begins.